He grabbed the box before she could stop him. Lucian Varelli's hand closed around the worn wooden edges of the thing she had carried 3 different apartments across 2 decades of marriage, the box that held her parents' faces, her sister's graduation, the only photograph of her mother laughing, and he walked it straight to the fireplace like it weighed nothing, like it meant nothing, because to him it did. "You want to cry in front of my guests?" he said. "Over cardboard and paper?" The photographs caught fast. Old prints burned quick. Evelyn Arden stood in the middle of her own living room, surrounded by 60 people drinking his wine, and she watched 40 years of her family turn to black edges and smoke. She did not scream. She did not move toward the fire. She did not beg. She just watched. And that stillness, that absolute refusal to break in front of him, was the last thing Lucian Varelli would ever take from her. If you've ever had someone destroy something irreplaceable just to prove, then could you already know exactly what Evelyn felt standing in that room? This is the story of a woman who spent 11 years being underestimated by the most dangerous man in her life. And one night, the night he burned her family, she decided she was done holding his world together. If this story hits you somewhere real, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, because stories like Evelyn's deserve to be heard all the way around the world. Let's go back to the beginning of the night everything changed. The Varelli's estate sat behind 12 feet of limestone wall on the northern edge of the city, and on any given Saturday night, it looked like a place where ordinary rules had been permanently suspended. The grounds were lit like a film set. Valet moved cars with the precision of men who had been screamed at before and did not intend to be screamed at again. Caterers in white shirts carried trays through the side entrance in a steady procession, and the sound of a live string quartet drifted from the glass-walled reception hall into the cold November air. Evelyn had organized this party, not Lucian, not his assistant, a skittish young man named Torres who had been fired and rehired 4 times in 3 years. Not Sabrina Vuss, the woman Lucian had been sleeping with for the better part of 2 years, and who had arrived tonight on his arm like that was a perfectly normal thing to do in front of 60 guests, half of whom had attended Evelyn's wedding. Evelyn had made the calls. Evelyn had approved the menu. Evelyn had chosen the flowers, confirmed the lighting, and spent 11 years making this house look like something a powerful man could be proud of standing inside. She knew every face in that room. The city councilman who owed Lucian a zoning favor. Property developer who had been laundering money through 3 shell companies Evelyn personally administered. The federal attorney Elias Hart, who had attended twice before, and who Evelyn privately suspected was not attending for the food. She noticed Hart first when she was crossing from the kitchen hallway back toward the main reception. He was standing near the east wall with a glass he had barely touched, watching the room the way a man watches something he already understands. Evelyn smiled at him when their eyes met. He smiled back. That was all. That was enough. She moved on. Lucian found her near the bar 20 minutes later, which meant he had been looking, which meant something had already gone sideways before he reached her. "Sabrina's uncomfortable," he said. His voice had a particular quality when he was managing a situation flat at the surface, something pressurized underneath. She had learned to read the layers of it, the way you learn to read weather. "Not my problem," Evelyn said. "Tonight it is." She looked at him. He was still handsome in the way that expensive suits and genuine confidence can keep a man looking handsome, well past the point where the character underneath warrants it. She had thought he was extraordinary once. She had believed in the mythology of him so completely that she had reorganized her entire professional life to serve it. "Lucian." She kept her voice level. "I'm not going to manage your girlfriend's feelings at our dinner party. She's a guest. She's the woman you've been sleeping with for 2 years, in a house I pay half the mortgage on. She can manage her own feelings." Something shifted in his face. Not anger, exactly more like the expression of a man who has decided that a conversation has become inconvenient. "Don't make tonight difficult," he said. "I haven't made anything difficult." He left her at the bar and went back towards Sabrina, who was standing near the fireplace in a red dress that Evelyn noted with grim precision was a full shade darker than the one she herself was wearing. Deliberate or not, Evelyn genuinely could not decide, and she had spent more energy than she intended thinking about it. She took a drink of water, not wine. She had learned years ago that she needed to be clear-headed when Lucian had been drinking. Party moved the way these parties always moved in clusters and currents. The same 6 conversations recycled across different combinations of people, kind of event where everyone was performing the version of themselves they most wanted Lucien Varelli to approve of. She watched Nolan Rusk, Lucien's longest-serving lieutenant, work the room with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this for 20 years. Nolan was good at parties. He was good at most things that required appearing to be one thing while actually being another. Evelyn had always known this about him. She had simply never said so out loud. Torres appeared at her elbow around 9:15. Mr. Varelli would like you to stop. Started again. He's asking if you could bring the box, the wooden box. He wants to show there's a conversation happening about. About what, Torres? The young man looked genuinely pained. About family heritage. Mr. Varelli, he mentioned you had photographs. He'd like you to bring them down. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The box had been in the upstairs study for years. It had traveled with her across every iteration of her life, from her childhood bedroom to her first apartment, through graduate school, into this marriage, into this house. Inside it, her parents on their wedding day, brittle and slightly overexposed. Her sister at 6 years old, squinting against summer light. A photograph of her grandmother at the kitchen table, taken the year before she died. Christmas from 1987, all of them crowded together in a house that no longer existed. Her father in his work uniform, the year he got his promotion, the one she had never seen him as proudly as the night they took that picture. Photographs from people who were gone, places that were gone, a version of herself that was gone. She carried the box down the stairs. She should not have. She knew it when she was on the stairs. She knew the particular register of Lucien's mood night, and she knew what it meant when he used the things she valued as performance pieces for his guests. And she understood on some cellular level that bringing the box into that room was a mistake. She did it anyway, because she still believed, on some exhausted and diminishing level, that there was a version of this man who remembered what it meant to be careful with her. She was wrong. Lucien took the box from her hands before she had fully crossed the room. There was a cluster of men around him, the developer, a business partner named Crest, who ran 3 restaurant groups across the city, and a man Evelyn didn't recognize who had the particular quality of stillness that she associated with money that didn't need to announce itself. This is what I mean. Lucien was saying, opening the box without asking. Keeps every piece of paper from 40 years like it's going to walk out the door. Light laughter from the cluster. The easy kind, the kind men produce when they're performing solidarity with whoever seems most powerful in the room. Lucien. Her own voice surprised her. Steady. Give it back. He looked at her over the lid of the box. Something in his eyes, not cruelty exactly, more like the complete absence of whatever it was that kept most people from doing the worst available version of a thing. You've been dragging this thing around since before I met you, he said. It's embarrassing. Those are my parents' photographs. They're old paper. The developer laughed again. Crest did not. The unknown man studied the far wall. Evelyn held out her hand. Lucien looked at her hand. Then he looked across the room to where Sabrina was standing, watching, and something passed between them, some signal, some confirmation, and he walked the box to the fireplace. Evelyn said, "Don't." He dropped the photographs into the fire. Not the box. Just the photographs. He pulled the stack of them out with one hand and placed them into the flames with a casualness that was worse than violence. The kind of damage that comes from a person who simply does not believe that what they are destroying matters. They caught within seconds. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something has happened that cannot be walked back. Evelyn stood still. She watched her mother's face disappear. She watched the summer photograph curl at the corners and turn. She watched her father in his work uniform become a brown and orange thing and then become nothing. Someone near the bar said something in a low voice. She didn't hear the words. Lucien was already turning back toward his guests, already smoothing the moment over with a half smile and a redirect, already performing the version of himself that found this entertaining. Evelyn set her empty hands at her sides. She did not cry. She had promised herself, years before, that she would never give him the satisfaction of watching her cry in public. That promise was the only boundary she had never let him cross. She kept it now, in this room with 60 people watching and the smell of burning paper in the air. She turned and walked away, not to the kitchen, not upstairs. She walked through the main hallway to the small sitting room off the east corridor, the room that was always kept closed during parties. And she stood in the dark for a while, and she breathed. The photographs were gone. 40 years, gone. Her hands were shaking. She noticed that the way you notice something from a slight remove, the way your brain reports facts that haven't fully arrived yet. Her hands were shaking, and there was a sound in her ears like water, and the room smelled like nothing, because she had closed the door behind her. She thought about her mother, not the photograph, the actual woman. The way she smelled like hand lotion, and always had. The particular sound of her voice when she was explaining something she cared about. The way she had looked at Evelyn when Evelyn brought Lucian home. The first time not suspicious exactly, but watchful in a way that Evelyn had chosen, at the time, to interpret as protectiveness rather than warning. She thought about her father's work uniform. She thought about the summer photograph, the one of all of them squinting because someone had aimed into the light, and they were all laughing at whoever was holding the camera. She stood in the dark sitting room for 6 minutes. She knew the length because there was a small clock on the mantel, and she watched it without intending to. Then she dried her hands on the fabric of her dress. Her hands were damp, she hadn't realized, and she opened the door and walked back into the party. She was the last person to leave her own event. She shook hands. She received compliments on the catering. She said the correct things to the correct people in the correct order, and she did not look at the fireplace. And she did not look at Lucian. And she did not look at Sabrina Voss in her red dress. Elias Hart stopped her near the exit. "Remarkable evening," he said. "Thank you for coming," she said. He studied her for a moment with the particular attention of a man who has spent a career watching people manage information in real time. "Are you all right, Mrs. Varelli?" "Perfectly," she said. And then, because something in her was already moving, already at work beneath the stillness, "We should have you again sometime." He handed her his card. She put it in her pocket. The last guests left at 11:40. Torres collected coats and managed the parking logistics and disappeared into the service wing. The caterers broke down the setup with the efficient silence of professionals. Lucian poured himself a final drink in the kitchen and didn't speak to her. Evelyn went upstairs. She sat at the small desk in the study, the room where the box had sat on the shelf for 11 years. The shelf that was empty now, and she opened her laptop and she stayed there until 2 in the morning. She was not crying. She was working. She was not writing letters. She was not composing angry messages she would regret. She was reviewing documents she had been reviewing, in various forms for the better part of a year. She had come to understand, somewhere in the last 18 months, that the things she had been doing with Lucian's financial structures, the organizing, the administering, the careful maintenance of his legitimate empire, had given her something he had never thought to question: access. She had access to the investment entities. She had access to the commercial property portfolios. She had signatory authority on 3 major accounts. She had professional relationships with 11 of the 14 significant investors in Lucian's legitimate operation. Because Lucian had never bothered to cultivate those relationships, himself he had handed them to her because relationship. Maintenance bored him, and she had turned each one into something careful and real. The investors knew her name. They trusted her judgment. In several cases, they had said as much to her directly that they appreciated her attention to detail, her responsiveness, her clear command of the accounts. 2 of them had told her, in separate conversations over the past year, that they sometimes felt more comfortable calling her than calling Lucian. She had noted these things without acting on them. Until now. She pulled up the contact list she had been maintaining separately for 14 months. Not on the shared system. On a personal account she had opened through a small private server that Lucian's IT person would not have found if they had been looking, which they had not been, because no one was looking for it. She began drafting. Not emails. Not yet. Just the shape of what was coming. The order of moves. The sequence that, once she set it in motion, would be very difficult to stop. Lucian went to bed at 2:15. She heard the bedroom door close down the hall. Kept working. By 4 in the morning she had 3 things ready. The first was an appointment, confirmed for 8:15 with her personal attorney, a woman named Dana Kreis, who worked out of a downtown office on the 18th floor and who had been Evelyn's attorney for 9 years, long before Lucian had known she existed. The second was a preliminary communication to Gideon Vale, the attorney who handled the structural components of Lucian's legitimate financial holdings and who had been, for the past 3 years, quietly, developing an impression that Evelyn was the more relevant person to speak to when it came to those structures. The third was a folder organized, annotated, numbered that contained 11 years of documentation relating to her specific contributions to every major financial entity in Lucian's legitimate empire. She had not built this folder for revenge. She had built it because she was the kind of person who documented things. Because she had learned, early in life, that the people who believe they will always be listened to tend to stop keeping records, and the people who understand they might not be believed tend to keep everything. She had kept everything. At 4:20, she closed the laptop and changed out of the dress. Did not sleep. She sat in the chair by the window in the study, and she watched the city go gray, and then pale, and then pink at the edges, the November dawn arriving slow and colorless and cold. She thought about the box. The box itself had not burned. Lucian had only taken the photographs from it. The box was still there, presumably, sitting beside the fireplace downstairs, wooden and empty. She had not gone back to retrieve it. She would, later, after. She thought about what her mother would say if she were alive to see this. Probably nothing, she decided. Her mother was not a woman who said much at moments of crisis. She was a woman who made tea and checked whether doors were locked and made sure everyone had eaten something. It was a way of saying, I am here without turning the situation into a performance. Evelyn had learned that from her, and she carried it the way she carried most things she had learned from the dead quietly, without advertisement. Her father would have been angry, not at Evelyn, at Lucian. Specific, cold workingman's anger that had no interest in being theatrical. Kind of anger that didn't shout. The kind that made decisions. She had learned that too. She listened to the house. At 5:42, she heard Lucian's alarm go off down the hall. She heard him silence it. She heard the shower run. She heard him move through his morning routine with the efficiency of a man who had been performing this same sequence for 40 years and had long since stopped thinking about it. 6:15, he came past the study on his way to the kitchen. He did not stop. The door was partially open, and she heard his footsteps pause. For just a moment she could see his shadow fall through the gap, and then continue down the hall. He had not seen her sitting in the dark, or he had seen her and did not know what to say, or he had seen her and did not think it required a response. All three possibilities, she decided, amounted to the same thing. She heard him make coffee. She heard him leave the house by 7. At 7:15, she showered and dressed. At 7:50, she left for downtown. Dana Kreis was already at her desk when Evelyn arrived. She had been Evelyn's attorney long enough that she did not require a lengthy explanation of context. She looked at Evelyn's face when she walked in, and she looked at the folder Evelyn set on the desk, and she did not ask any unnecessary questions. Divorce, Evelyn said. Dana opened the folder. She spent 3 minutes reviewing the first section. Then she looked up. You built this yourself? Over 11 years. He doesn't know the extent of your authority in these structures. He trusted me to manage what he didn't want to manage. Dana closed the folder carefully. The way you close something you intend to treat with respect. Evelyn. This is not a standard high-asset divorce. I know. Depending on how the operational authority is documented, and from what I'm seeing here, it's documented extensively, you may have a claim to co-equal authority over a significant portion of what he considers his. I know that too. Dana was quiet for a moment. She was a woman of around 60 with short gray hair and the patient expression of someone who has spent 30 years listening to people describe their worst situations and working out, methodically, what can be saved. Is there anything else I should know before we proceed? Evelyn thought about Elias Hart standing by the east wall with a glass he had barely touched. She thought about the folder and what was in the folder and what else existed that was not in this particular folder. There may be some additional complexity down the road, she said. I'll let you know as it becomes relevant. Dana nodded slowly. All right. How soon can you file? If you want to move today, I can have the petition ready by end of business. Evelyn looked out the window at the city 11 stories below. Today, she said. The paperwork moved through the system with the quiet efficiency of a machine that had been built by someone who understood exactly how it worked. Dana made 3 calls within the hour, by 11 a. Gideon Vale had received a preliminary notification regarding the dissolution of the Varelli marriage and was asked to prepare documentation concerning all entities in which Evelyn Arden Varelli held operational authority. Vale called Lucian at 11:20. Evelyn was not in the room for that call. Back downtown, in her own office, the small administrative space she had maintained independently throughout the marriage, which Lucian had always regarded as a kind of hobby, reviewing the investment contact list and composing the first of the professional communications she intended to send before the end of the week. She kept them measured. She kept them factual. She did not mention the divorce. She simply reached out to the investors she knew, in the voice they knew her in, with the directness they had come to expect from her. And she said, I wanted to touch base directly. I wanted to make sure you know I'm available if you have questions about any of the accounts. Not I am leaving Lucian. Not the empire is fracturing. Just I'm here. I know where everything is. You can call me. 3 of them called back within 4 hours. The 4th called before she had finished lunch. She was eating a sandwich at her desk, tuna on wheat, which she had not been able to eat for years, because Lucian found the smell offensive when her phone showed the name Marcus Holt, who was the lead investor in the Meridian property portfolio, and whose annual returns from that portfolio had increased 12% in the 3 years since Evelyn had taken over primary management of the account. Evelyn. His voice was careful, probing something it wasn't naming yet. I heard from Gideon this morning. Should I be concerned about anything? She finished chewing. She swallowed. She said, She's Marcus, I think you should be attentive, which is different from concerned. I'd recommend reviewing the structural documents for the portfolio entities. I can send you a summary if that would help. A pause. Are you going to be continuing to manage the portfolio? My intention. Another pause. Longer, all right. Send me the summary. She sent him the summary. She ate the rest of her sandwich. Lucian called her at 2 in the afternoon. She let it go to voicemail. He called again at 2:40. She let that go too. His voice on the messages was the particular tone of a man who has just discovered that something he believed was entirely under his control is not controlled. Still, by something, but not necessarily by him. Call me back, was all the second message said. She did not. She was in a meeting with Dana at 3, reviewing the petition documents, when her phone showed a text from Nolan Rusk. It said only as this responded, yes. There was a long gap. Then Jesus Evelyn. She put the phone face down and returned to the documents. At 5:15, Dana filed the petition. Evelyn drove home. The house was quiet when she arrived. Lucian's car was in the drive, which she had expected. She came through the front door and went directly to the kitchen for water, and he was standing at the counter with a drink. And he looked at her with an expression she had seen before, the one that lived in the gap between anger and something underneath the anger that he had never in 11 years allowed himself to name. What have you done? He said. Not a question. The sentence structure of a man who was still in the process of realizing the answer. She set her bag down. She filled a glass with water. I filed for divorce, she said. You can't. He stopped. Started. You can't do this. You don't understand what. Another stop. He was working through the pieces. In real time, she could see it on his face. The particular sequence of revelations that Gideon had apparently been walking him through since morning. Vale says you have signatory authority on the Meridian accounts. I do. Since when? Since 3 years ago, when you told me to handle the portfolio management, because you said the quarterly reviews were boring you. The silence in the kitchen had weight. The Holt relationship, he said. I manage the Holt relationship. I have for 4 years. Commercial properties on the commercial portfolio, the development entities, the Crestwood Partnership investment. She listed them flatly. I administrate all of them. My name is on the operational documents. I have direct relationships with the investors and the city contacts and the contract managers. She drank her water. You asked me to take over those relationships because you found the maintenance tedious. I did. I've been doing it for years. He was looking at her like she was a room he had walked into, expecting to be familiar, and had found rearranged into something he didn't recognize. You did this on purpose, he said. I did my job on purpose, she said. It's not the same thing. Evelyn, you burned my mother's face. The words came out level, not raised, not theatrical, just stated. The way you state a fact. She picked up her bag. She walked past him toward the hallway. You burned 40 years of my family, she said without turning around, in front of 60 people, because you wanted her to feel comfortable. I hope she did. She went upstairs. She heard him hit the counter behind her, an open palm, not a fist, the sound of frustration rather than violence. She had learned the difference years ago. She locked the study door from the inside. She sat at the desk. She opened the laptop. She continued working. Outside, the November evening came down cold and fast, the way evenings do in that city in that month, all the light gone by 5 and the sky the color of old lead. She worked by the lamp on the corner of the desk. She did not turn on the overhead light. She did not go back downstairs. At 7:30, she heard the front door. She crossed to the window in time to see Lucian's car back out of the drive and pull into the street. She watched until the taillights disappeared. Then she went downstairs to the kitchen, made herself a real dinner, not a sandwich, an actual meal, and ate it alone at the table in the quiet, in the room where the party had been the night before, with the chairs still slightly out of place and the smell of the event still faint in the air. The box was on the hearth beside the fireplace, empty, as she had known it would be. She picked it up on her way back through. She held it for a moment, the worn wood, the brass latch that had been stiff for a decade, small carved initials on the bottom corner that her grandmother had put there long before she was born. She carried it upstairs and put it back on the shelf. It was still worth keeping. Even empty, it was still hers. She sat back down at the desk and she thought, tomorrow everything gets harder. She was right. But tonight, in the quiet of the emptied house, with the box back on its shelf, and the work in front of her, and the world not yet fully aware of what just set in motion tonight, for the first time in a very long time, she felt something that was not peace exactly, and was not relief exactly, but was something adjacent to both. She felt like herself. She had almost forgotten what that felt like. She opened the laptop and kept going. Lucian did not come home that night. She knew this because she woke at 3 in the morning with the particular alertness that comes from sleeping too lightly in a house that doesn't feel right, and she lay still in the dark and listened to the absence of him. No sound from the master bedroom down the hall. No car in the drive when she crossed to the window. Nothing. She went back to the desk. She did not go back to sleep. By 6, she had drafted the preliminary communications to 4 additional investors and reviewed the structural documents on the Crestwood partnership for the 3rd time in as many days. The Crestwood documents were the ones she was most careful with. They were also the ones that, if read by the right set of eyes, would raise questions that had nothing to do with her divorce petition and everything to do with where a portion of Crestwood's capitalization had originally come from. She had known about that for 3 years. She had documented it without acting on it, the way you document a structural crack in a wall, noting it, monitoring it, understanding that the moment you report it, the entire building becomes someone else's problem. Closed the Crestwood file and made coffee. Lucian's car pulled into the drive at 7:10. She heard the engine, then the door, then his footsteps on the front path. She did not go to the window. She poured her coffee and stood at the kitchen counter and waited for whatever version of this morning he had decided to perform. He came through the front door and stopped at the kitchen entrance. He looked like a man who had spent the night doing something that had not resolved the way he hoped. His jacket was the same one from yesterday. His eyes had the glassy, over-focused quality of someone running on bad sleep and worse decisions. He looked at her. She drank her coffee. Gideon wants to meet, he said. Gideon can call my attorney, Evelyn. The way he said her name compressed, like he was trying to fit a much larger conversation into 2 syllables. I need you to hear me out. I've been hearing you for 11 years. This is different. What's different about it? He came into the kitchen. He stopped on the far side of the island. She noticed that. The distance he maintained, like he was already calculating what she would and wouldn't allow. I need you to understand what you're putting at risk. Not just the 2 of us, the whole structure. This goes sideways. Which structure are you worried about? He looked at her. The investment portfolio, she said. Commercial properties? Or the parts you've never had me document because you preferred I didn't know they existed? Kitchen was very quiet. Be careful, he said. I'm always careful. She set down her cup. That's why everything still works. He put both hands flat on the counter. His jaw was tight. She could see the particular muscle at the corner of it that moved when he was working very hard, not to see the first thing that came into his head. You file for divorce the morning after a party, without a conversation. I had a conversation. That wasn't a conversation. You burned my photographs, Lucian, in front of your girlfriend and 60 guests. What conversation did you think we were going to have after that? Paper. Do not say that again. He stopped. She picked up her coffee cup. She was surprised to find that her hand was steady. I'm going to work. Gideon should reach out to Dana Kreis. She'll be handling the proceedings on my end. You can't just... I already did. She picked up her bag from the counter. Petition was filed yesterday afternoon. She walked past him. He said, behind her, Evelyn. If you pull apart those accounts, if investors start asking questions, you know what that does. Stop. She did not turn around. I know exactly what it does, she said. She left. The drive downtown was 22 minutes in the November traffic, which she spent in a particular kind of focused silence that was not calm but functioned like it. The silence of someone running through sequences, through contingencies, through the map of what was coming and what would need to happen in what order. Dana called her before she reached the parking structure. Gideon Vale's office called this morning, Dana said. He's requesting an urgent meeting. He can meet with you. He's specifically requesting your presence. He can request whatever he wants. I'm not sitting in a room with Lucian's attorney without counsel and a prepared agenda. Understood. A brief pause. Evelyn, there's something else. Vale apparently told Lucian's assistant that the asset documentation you provided to my office last week his word was extensive. It is. He sounded concerned. He should be. She pulled into the structure and killed the engine. Dana, set the meeting for Thursday, my office, not his. And I want the full operational authority documents reviewed and ready before we go in. Done. She sat in the car for 30 seconds after she hung up. Then she went to work. The office was small by any standard, 2 rooms on the 7th floor of a building that housed mostly accountants and a mid-size insurance firm. But it was hers in a way the estate had never been. She had signed the lease herself. She had chosen the furniture. The filing system was her own invention, and nobody else understood it, which she had always privately enjoyed. Her assistant, a capable young woman named Priya, who had been with her for 2 years, and who operated with the particular efficiency of someone who has decided to be excellent at their job, regardless of whether anyone notices, handed her a message slip when she came through the door. Nolan Russ called, Priya said. He said it was personal. Evelyn looked at the slip. Did he say anything else? He said to call him before you talk to anyone else today. She went into her office and closed the door. Nolan Rusk had been Lucian's right hand for 22 years, which meant that, in the calculus of Lucian's world, Nolan knew more than anyone alive about how that world actually functioned, not the public face, not the investment portfolios and the commercial properties, but the deeper architecture underneath. She had always understood that Nolan's loyalty to Lucian was real, and also that it was not unconditional, because she had never met a human being whose loyalty to another human being was unconditional. Loyalty had always seemed to her to be a thing that required regular maintenance, like anything else worth keeping. And Lucian had never been good at maintenance. She called him. He picked up on the second ring. You filed, he said. You knew I was going to. A pause. The particular quality of a pause from a man deciding how much to say. I knew something was coming. I didn't know it was going to be this fast. He burned my photographs, Nolan. Another pause. Longer. I know what he did. Were you there? I was in the other room. I heard about it after. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before, not quite remorse, but adjacent to it. Something uncomfortable. Evelyn, I need to ask you something. And I need you to hear it as a question, not an accusation. Go ahead. How far does this go? The asset documentation. What are you planning to actually show people? She was quiet for a moment. Why is she asking? Because there are things in those structures that you and I both know have nothing to do with your divorce, he said. And if this process opens them up, Nolan, she kept her voice even. Are you calling to warn me or to ask me to stop? Silence. I'm calling because I've known you for 11 years and I think you're the smartest person in this whole operation, and I want to know if you understand what you're standing next to. I understand exactly what I'm standing next to, she said. I've understood it for 3 years. The question is what you're standing next to, and whether you've thought about what happens if the whole thing gets examined. The silence on the other end of the line had a different quality now. I need to think, he said. Think fast, she said. Gideon is already moving. She hung up. She sat still for a moment, her hand on the desk, the phone in front of her. Then she opened her calendar and started her day. The meeting she had not scheduled and had not anticipated came at 11:45 in the form of a knock on her office door, followed by Priya opening it with the expression of someone delivering information they had not been given time to process. There's a Mr. Hart here, Priya said. He says he doesn't have an appointment, but he said to tell you his name and ask if you had 15 minutes. Evelyn looked at her, Elias Hart, the federal attorney who had attended the party Saturday night with a glass he barely touched, and the patient attention of a man who was not there for the canapes. Send him in, she said. He came in alone, which she noted. He was wearing a different suit than Saturday, but the same quality of stillness, a man who moved through spaces without making them feel crowded. He was around 55, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and the kind of face that had been lived in hard enough to become interesting. He sat in the chair across from her desk without being invited to, which she also noted not rudely, just the movement of someone who has conducted enough meetings to understand that the invitation is usually implied. I appreciate you seeing me, he said. I almost didn't, she said. It depends on what the next sentence is. A slight adjustment in his expression, not quite a smile. I've been watching the Varelli structure for 14 months, he said. Specifically the capitalization channels for 3 of the development entities. She kept her face still. I know you administrate those entities, he said. I also know, from public records and from information that has come to us through separate channels, That your role in the financial operations is significantly more substantive than your husband has ever publicly represented. What is it you want, Mr. Hart? To understand your position, he said. Before things get complicated. Things are already complicated. They're going to get considerably more so. He crossed one leg over the other, unhurried, the body language of a man who is not in a hurry, because he believes time is on his side. The divorce petition you filed yesterday is a public document, going to prompt examination of the asset structures. That examination is going to produce questions. My office is going to be among the parties asking them. She was quiet. Mrs. Varelli Arden, she said. I'll be returning to my name. He adjusted. Miss Arden, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because in my experience, the people who build things and the people who exploit things are not always the same people, even when they're in the same room. And I'd like to understand, before the formal process begins, which category applies to you? She looked at him for a long moment. You came here without a subpoena, she said. Correct. Without counsel. Correct, which means this conversation is informal and nothing I say is... Nothing about this conversation is on the record, he said. I want your honest read of the situation, not a statement. She thought about Nolan's phone call. She thought about the Crestwood file. She thought about the photographs burning in the fireplace, and the empty box on the shelf upstairs, and the 11 years of documentation she had been building, because she was the kind of person who documented things. I built the financial structures that make his legitimate operation function, she said. I did that because I was asked to, and because I'm good at it, and because I believed for a long time that there was a version of this life that was worth maintaining. She looked at Hart steadily. I am not responsible for what was capitalized into those structures before I arrived, and in channels I was specifically kept away from. Hart was listening with his whole attention, the way people listen when they are filing things carefully, rather than simply hearing them. But you know what those channels are, he said. She did not answer. He nodded slowly. All right, he stood. Ms. Arden. I expect we'll be speaking more formally in the near future. I hope, when that happens, you'll have made a clear decision about where you stand. I'll be standing where I've always stood, she said. I just won't be doing it quietly, he left. She sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and called Dana. Gideon Vale arrived at Lucian's estate at noon, and they sat in the study, the room Lucian's used for meetings he didn't want conducted near windows, and Gideon laid out, in the methodical and slightly pained tone of a man delivering news he is not enjoying, exactly what the asset documentation meant. Lucian already knew some of it. He had known in a general way that Evelyn administered the investment portfolios and the commercial entities. He had handed those responsibilities to her the way busy men hand things to capable women, with the tacit assumption that the capability exists to serve his interests and not to develop interests of its own. What he had not understood, what Gideon was explaining now, with supporting documents spread across the desk, was the structural depth of it, the signatory authority, the direct investor relationships. The city contact network she had built through 4 years of methodical cultivation. She's not just an administrator, Gideon said. I know that now. Lucian's voice was flat. In 3 of the entities, she has operational co-authority that's going to require her consent to transfer, dissolve, or restructure. Can we contest it? Gideon hesitated in the way that attorneys hesitate when they are choosing between accuracy and what the client wants to hear. The documentation is very clean, he said. It's going to be difficult to argue that her authority wasn't intentionally granted. There are years of correspondence, transaction records, investor communications, all of it establishing her as the operational decision-maker. She built this on purpose, Lucian said. Gideon looked at him carefully. She built it because you asked her to. Whether the current situation was anticipated, I can't say. But the documentation is legitimate. There's nothing improper about it. Lucian stood up from his chair and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets, looking at the grounds. What about Holt, he said. Marcus Holt called our office this morning. He had already spoken with Evelyn. Lucian didn't respond. He's not threatening to withdraw, Gideon said carefully. But he made it clear he considers his primary relationship to be with her, not with you. At this point, the muscle in Lucian's jaw, the one she knew. Who else? We're still assessing. But I would expect Lucian, the investor base for the legitimate operation, has been managed primarily by Evelyn for several years. If she signals that she's the more stable point of contact right now, they're going to respond to that signal. Lucian turned from the window. His face had settled into the particular expression she had seen maybe twice in 11 years, not anger, not calculation, but something under both of those things. Something that looked almost like fear translated into cold, focused attention. "What do I need to do?" he said. Gideon opened his mouth. Lucian's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Nolan picked up. "I need to see you," Nolan said. "No preamble. Tonight. Not at the estate. What's happened?" "Nothing yet, but something's going to." A pause. "Hart paid a visit somewhere this morning. I heard about it an hour ago." Lucian looked at Gideon. Where Lucian said into the phone, Nolan told him. Lucian was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'll be at the warehouse at 8. He hung up. Gideon was watching him with the expression of a man who has just understood that the case he thought he was working has a dimension he was not previously informed about. "Gideon," Lucian said, "we're going to table the asset discussion." Lucian, "Table it." His voice had changed. The flatness gone something sharper underneath now. The register he used when he was managing something genuinely dangerous. "I'll call you tomorrow." Gideon gathered his documents slowly, the way a careful man gathers documents when he's unsure whether he wants to know what he's just walked to the edge of. Lucian stood alone in the study. The estate was very quiet around him, the particular quiet of a large house that used to be full of the organizational activity of someone who had stopped organizing it. He could feel the absence of her in the way you feel a shift in air pressure. Something atmospheric and wrong. Crossed to the desk and sat down. He opened the bottom drawer. Inside it, beneath a layer of standard files, was a slim portable drive in a gray case. He had put it there 4 years ago and had not touched it since, because the information on it was the kind of information you only use when you have absolutely no other option. And for 4 years he had always had other options. Picked it up, turned it over in his hand. On it were recorded conversations, financial records, and correspondence connecting 6 men, none of them Lucian, to the deeper capitalization channels. The channels the money had come through before Evelyn's clean administration had built a legitimate structure above them. The kind of records a careful man keeps, because in the business he was in, the only real insurance was information. He had kept it. He had never intended to use it. He put it in his jacket pocket. At 8 o'clock, he drove to the warehouse on the south side, a legitimate storage facility on paper, used for years as a meeting place by people who preferred their conversations to occur in locations without ambient recording equipment. Nolan was already there with 2 men Lucian, recognized from the organization's outer circle. That was the first thing wrong. Nolan had never brought men to a private meeting between the 2 of them. In 22 years of partnership, the rules of their private conversations had always been the same. Just the 2 of them. No witnesses, no record. Lucian stepped inside and looked at the 2 men and then at Nolan. "Send them outside," he said. Nolan didn't move immediately. "That was the second thing wrong. Nolan," he said. The word flat and precise as a blade laid on a table. Nolan looked at the 2 men and nodded. They went outside. Lucian waited until the door closed. "What is this?" he said. Nolan looked tired in a way that Lucian could not immediately categorize. Not sleep-tired. Tired like a man who has been carrying weight in a particular direction for too long and has recently adjusted the direction and can feel the difference in every muscle. "Hart went to see Evelyn this morning," Nolan said. "I know. Do you know why? Because he's been watching the development entities for over a year," Gideon told me. Nolan looked at him steadily. "He's not just watching the entities, Lucian. He has a cooperating source inside the network. Has had one for 8 months. The warehouse was cold. The kind of cold that came from concrete walls and insufficient heating and the November air pressing in from outside. Lucian could feel it through his jacket. "Who?" he said. "We don't know yet." "How do you know there is one?" Nolan's jaw moved slightly. "Because some of what Hart's office has been examining the specific documents they've requested through channels. Those documents weren't publicly accessible. Someone gave them a roadmap." Lucian looked at him. "And you came here with 2 men," Lucian said slowly, "to tell me about a leak." Nolan said nothing. "Why the men, Nolan?" "Because there's something else." Nolan's voice was careful now, the voice of someone moving through a sentence that has to be exactly right. "There's been talk, in the outer circle, about the drive." Lucian went very still. "The people who know you kept records," Nolan started. "Who told them? It doesn't matter who told them. What matters is they know you have it, and they want it, and they are going to want it more urgently now that Hart is circling." Lucian understood, with the clarity that comes from having operated in dangerous circumstances for 20 years, exactly what was happening. This was not a warning. This was a demand with a preamble. He looked at Nolan, the man he had built this world beside. The man who knew where every body was buried, because he had helped carry most of them, and he saw, for the first time with complete clarity, the man standing in front of him was not the same man who had been standing beside him. Had not been, possibly, for some time. "You're not here because of heart," Lucian said. Nolan didn't answer. "You're here because someone sent you." "Lucian, who sent you?" Question landed in the cold warehouse air, and Nolan Rusk, 22 years, his oldest alliance, the man who had been at his right hand through everything, looked at him with an expression that confirmed, without a single word, that Lucian was correct and that whatever came next was not going to be resolved by conversation. Lucian's hand was in his jacket pocket. His fingers were around the drive. He did not take it out. He looked at Nolan and said very quietly, "You should have just asked me directly." And Nolan said, "I'm asking you now." Lucian did not hand over the drive. That was the thing. Nolan had not fully planned for that. After 22 years of watching Lucian Varelli make decisions, he had somehow miscalculated the one decision that mattered most. He had brought 2 men. He had prepared the conversation. He had delivered the ask with the careful phrasing of someone who had rehearsed it, and he had watched Lucian's face go through the sequence of recognition and understanding and cold fury, and he had believed, apparently, that at the end of all that, Lucian would simply hand it over. Lucian took his hand out of his jacket pocket. Empty. "I don't have it with me," he said. Nolan looked at the empty hand. Something moved across his face, not quite belief, not quite the opposite of it. The expression of a man recalibrating. "I don't have it with me." His voice was the flattest it had been all night. "If you want to send your men back in here to check my pockets, go ahead. But I'd think carefully about what that means for the next 20 minutes. The warehouse held its cold silence around them. Nolan did not call the men back in. He looked at Lucian for a long moment, the look of a man who is deciding whether a situation has already become unrecoverable, or whether there is still a version of this that ends without permanent damage, and then he exhaled so slowly through his nose and looked away. 2 days, Nolan said. For what? To think about it. His voice had gone flat too, matching Lucian's register the way it always had, the unconscious mirroring of 2 men who had spent 2 decades in close enough proximity to absorb each other's cadences. Think about your position. Think about what the drive actually protects and what it doesn't. And call me. I'll think about it, Lucian said. Neither of them said anything else. Lucian walked out. The 2 men were standing by the exterior door. He passed between them without breaking stride, without looking at either of them, with a particular quality of movement that communicates very clearly that the wrong response to his passage would be catastrophic. They didn't move. He got into his car. He drove 3 blocks, turned into an empty commercial parking lot, and sat with the engine running, and his hands on the wheel, and he breathed. The drive was in his jacket pocket. He had moved it there from the desk drawer this afternoon, and when Nolan had asked for it tonight, he had taken his hand out of the pocket empty, because the alternative, handing it to a man who was now clearly operating under someone else's instructions, would have been the last decision he ever made as a free man. He understood, sitting in the parking lot with the November cold pressing against the windows, that the situation had changed in ways that a 48-hour delay would not resolve. Nolan had not shown up tonight because of heart. Nolan had shown up tonight because someone above Nolan's usual operational ceiling had decided that the drive needed to be controlled and had deployed the most available asset, a 22-year relationship, to retrieve it. The question was who that someone was, and the secondary question, more immediately pressing, was what they intended to do when Nolan reported back that the request had been declined. He called Gideon from the parking lot. Gideon answered on the 4th ring, which meant he had been asleep, which meant it was later than Lucian had registered. He checked the dashboard, 11:50. "I need to see you tomorrow morning," Lucian said. "Lucian, it's midnight, 7 a.m., your office. Bring whoever you trust most on the criminal side." A pause of the kind that attorneys produce when they are updating their understanding of what a case involves. "All right," Gideon said carefully. 7. Lucian drove home. The estate was dark, not the comfortable dark of a house where people are sleeping, the flat, institutional dark of a building where nobody has left lights on, because there's no one thinking about coming back to them. He had grown accustomed, over the years, to Evelyn's habits around light, the way she kept the kitchen lamp on in the evenings, the study light burning, whenever she was working late. The small lamp in the upstairs hallway that she turned on at dusk every day without apparent thought, the way you maintain a habit so old it's become reflex. All of it dark now. He went inside. He went to the study and sat at the desk and looked at the empty shelf where the box had been. She had taken it back upstairs, he assumed, or put it somewhere he wouldn't look. He took out the drive and set it on the desk. It was a slim thing. Gray case, no label. The kind of object that looked like nothing and contained everything. He had spent 4 years being careful with it, without being quite aware that he was doing so. 4 years of keeping it close and not deploying it, and telling himself that the caution was prudent rather than afraid. He had been afraid. He understood now. He had been afraid of what using it would mean. Not for the men it implicated. He had no particular moral crisis about that, but for himself. Because the moment he used it, he was no longer a man who operated in the space between legitimate and illegitimate. He was a man who had crossed into a territory where the rules were different and the consequences were permanent. He had never wanted to cross that line. He had simply, over 20 years, built a life that made the line invisible. He put the drive in the drawer and went to bed. He did not sleep. 6:40 he was showered and dressed and driving downtown. He found a coffee cart near Gideon's building and bought 2 cups and carried them upstairs, and was sitting across from Gideon and a second attorney, a compact, precise woman named Carr, who specialized in federal criminal defense at 7:05. He told them about the warehouse meeting. He told them about Nolan. He told them about the drive, not its contents, not yet but its existence, and the fact that people who should not know about it did. Carr listened with the specific quality of attention that criminal defense attorneys develop, which is the ability to hear the shape of a situation without reacting to any individual part of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Who else knows the drive exists?" she said. 3 people, Nolan now. And whoever told Nolan. But not the contents. Not the contents. They know I kept records. They don't know what's on them. Are you certain? Thought about it. Reasonably. She looked at Gideon. Gideon looked at his coffee. "Mr. Varelli," Carr said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer directly. What is on the drive?" He looked at her. She looked back. Patience of a woman who has heard worse and is not going to fill the silence. "Recorded conversations," he said. "Financial documents. Correspondence between 6 people who are significantly above my operational level and who used my organization's structures, the legitimate structures Evelyn built, as a layering mechanism for funds that originated elsewhere." Carr absorbed this. "You were aware this was happening?" "I became aware." "Yes. When? 4 years ago. And you documented it, instead of reporting it." "Yes." He drank his coffee. "I documented it because I understood it was leverage. And I thought I might need leverage someday." "Today is someday," she said. "That appears to be where we've arrived." She leaned forward slightly. "If what you're describing is accurate, if the drive contains evidence in connecting senior principals to layering activity through legitimate structures, that is not a small piece of information. That is the kind of information federal prosecutors spend years trying to develop. I know what it is. And the men who want it don't want it made available to federal prosecutors," he said. "Correct." The room was quiet. Gideon said very carefully, "Lucian. Hart approached Evelyn yesterday." "I know. If Hart's office is already examining the development entities, and if they have a source inside the network, they may be closer to this than you realize." "I know that, too." Carr said, "The position you're in right now, between the people who want the drive suppressed and a federal investigation that may independently reconstruct what's on it, is genuinely dangerous. I want you to understand that plainly." "I understand it." "Your options are narrowing." "I understand that too." She looked at him steadily. "Is there anything else I should know before I tell you what I think your options are?" He thought about Evelyn. He thought about the Crestwood documents she had reviewed, the ones he knew she had, because he had seen the access logs on the shared system before she had separated from it. Thought about 11 years of careful, quiet, thorough documentation from a woman who documented everything. He thought about what she might have understood about the capitalization channels without ever telling him she understood it. He thought about the card Hart had given her at the party. "There may be another factor," he said. Carr waited. "My wife, my ex-wife, has been administrating the legitimate structures for years. She has full access to the financial documentation for every entity. She's meticulous." He set down his cup, and she had a conversation with Hart yesterday morning that I was not present for. Carr was quiet for a moment. "Does she know about the drive?" she said. "No." "Does she know about the capitalization channels?" He considered this carefully. "I don't know what she knows." Carr and Gideon exchanged a look. "All right," Carr said, straightened in her chair. "Here is where I think you stand." He listened. The picture she drew was not the worst he had imagined, but it was close. The federal examination of the development entities was real and appeared to be substantive. The cooperating source inside the network, if Nolan's information was accurate, had been providing a roadmap that would eventually lead Hart's office to the capitalization questions. The drive, if recovered by the principals who wanted it, would disappear, and the evidence it contained would disappear with it. And Lucian would have lost his one piece of genuine leverage without gaining any protection in return. And the divorce proceedings, with Evelyn's asset documentation now in the system, had created a public financial examination that would accelerate everything. You have approximately one viable path, Carr said. He looked at her. The drive is only worth something to you while you hold it, she said. The moment you surrender it, to anyone to the men who want it, or to us sitting on it, that window closes. But if you bring it forward to the right people with the right structure around it, it becomes something different. It becomes the basis for a cooperation agreement. Lucian was quiet. You'd be giving up the network, Carr said. I know. You'd be on record named. The whole structure. I know. The men on that drive are dangerous people who have just sent my closest associate to my door to take it by implication of force, he said. I'm aware of who they are. She looked at him steadily. This is a significant decision. I'm not telling you to make it today. I'm not making it today, he said. He left the office at 8:40. He sat in his car and called the one person he had not yet called. Evelyn picked up on the third ring. I need to speak with you, he said. A brief silence, the kind that meant she was deciding something. About what? Not on the phone, another silence. Lucian, something has happened that is separate from the divorce. It involves the structures you administered. I need you to know about it before you hear about it through other channels. The silence this time was longer. He could hear her breathing steady, controlled, the breath of a woman who had already decided she was not going to react the way he expected her to react. I'll come to your office, he said. No, quick, firm. Somewhere neutral. There's a coffee place on Merchant Street. 11 o'clock. All right. She hung up first. He arrived at the coffee place on Merchant Street at 10:50 and sat at a corner table with his back to the wall, which was habit, and ordered coffee he didn't want, and waited. She came in at 11 exactly. She was wearing a dark coat and her hair pulled back, and she moved through the room with the particular quality of composure that he had always registered as confidence, but understood now, in a way he hadn't before, was something harder than confidence. It was control, the kind that costs something, the kind that doesn't come free. She sat down across from him. She did not order anything. She looked at him and said, Tell me, he told her. Not everything, not Carr, not the full scope of what he was weighing, but the essential facts. The meeting in the warehouse, Nolan, the men who had been brought, the drive and what it contained, the people above Nolan who wanted it and why. She listened without interrupting. Her face was still, but her eyes were moving. She was processing, organizing, building the picture in the way he had watched her build pictures for 11 years, the rapid and precise assembly information into structure. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. The capitalization channels, she said, through Crestwood. Yes, I've known about those for 3 years. He looked at her. I suspected the year before that, she said. I documented it without raising it, because I didn't know I wasn't sure whether I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. And then I was sure, and I still didn't raise it because she stopped. Because why? She looked at him across the table. Her jaw was set in the way it got when she was saying something that cost her something to say. Because I was still trying to believe there was a version of this that wasn't what it looked like. He understood what she meant. She had been protecting him, not from the law, from having to face what he was. And he had repaid that by burning her photographs in a fireplace in front of 60 people, because his girlfriend was uncomfortable. The thought sat in him like something swallowed wrong. The financial records I've been documenting, she said. The last 3 years of administration records, they show the layering pattern, not the source. But the structure is visible if someone knows what to look for. Hart knows what to look for. Yes, have you given him anything? She looked at him with an expression that was not quite offense and not quite patience. No, I've spoken with him once, informally. I haven't provided anything. But you have the documentation. I have 11 years of documentation. He looked at her across the small table in the coffee shop on Merchant Street, the November light coming through the window cold and flat, and he thought about the drive in his jacket pocket, and the men who wanted it, and the federal attorney who was circling closer, and the 22-year alliance that had revealed itself in a cold warehouse the night before as somethingsy. He could not name without feeling the ground shift. I'm going to ask you something, he said, And I need you to answer honestly. She waited. Do you still have access to the Crestwood documents? The full administrative records? Yes, even after. The signatory authority is still mine. Dana confirmed it this week. It hasn't been contested. Her voice was steady. What? He reached into his jacket pocket. He set the drive on the table between them. She looked at it. She looked up at him. What is on that? She said. Everything that proves who built the channels that ran through the structures you administered. He kept his voice even. 6 men, recorded, documented, with the financial trail. She did not touch the drive. The men who want this, he said, sent Nolan to my door last night with 2 armed men. They'll try again. And the next time they won't phrase it as a request. Coffee shop was warm and quiet around them. A couple near the window was talking about something ordinary. Someone's cup clinked against a saucer. The ordinary texture of a public Tuesday morning in November. Evelyn looked at the drive on the table. You want me to hold it, she said. No. He picked it up, pocketed it. I want you to understand why I'm telling you about it. Because if something happens to me before I can act on it, you need to know what exists and where. Stared at him. Lucia, I'm not asking you to protect me, he said. I'm past asking you for anything. I'm telling you because you spent 11 years building a structure that these men used without your knowledge, and if this goes wrong, your name is on those entities, and you deserve to know what was underneath them. She was very still. And because you were right, he said, last week. When you said what you knew what it did. You've always known more than I gave you credit for. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was not softening, and was not forgiveness, and was not the opening of any door, but was he thought the particular expression of someone who has received an accurate piece of information that they needed, and did not expect to get. Go to heart, she said. That path has consequences. All the paths have consequences. Go to heart. Give him what's on the drive. Get whatever protection you can negotiate and get out of the network before the men who want that drive to clean her solution is to simply remove you. He looked at her. You don't have 22 years of loyalty behind you anymore, she said. You saw that last night. You don't have a structure. You don't have an organization moving in your direction. What you have is a piece of evidence that a federal attorney will value and that dangerous men need to suppress. That's your one asset. Use it before it gets taken from you. She stood up. She pulled on her coat. Evelyn, he said. Stopped. I'm sorry. About the photographs, she looked at him. The expression on her face was the one he had never been able to fully read, not cold, not warm. Something that lived in the space between the two, the expression of a woman who has already completed a calculation that the other person in the room is only beginning. I know you are, she said. She left. He sat at the table alone, with his coffee and the November light and the weight of the drive in his pocket, the slowly arriving understanding that sorry was the truest thing he had said to another person in longer than he could honestly remember, and that it had arrived about 11 years too late to matter in the way it should have. Pulled out his phone. He called Carr. Set up the meeting, he said, with heart as soon as possible. Carr was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. All right. I'll need 48 hours to prepare the framework. You have 24, he said. I don't think I have 48. He was right. At 4:15 that afternoon, Priya knocked on Evelyn's office door and opened it with an expression that had gone several shades past her normal professional composure. There are 2 men downstairs, she said. They didn't give names. They said they're here on behalf of a business associate of your husband's. They want to speak with you. Evelyn looked up from her desk. Did they say which associate? No. They said it was regarding the Crestwood partnership documents. Evelyn held Priya's gaze for a moment. Call building security, she said. Tell them I have uninvited guests in the lobby. Then call Dana Kreis and tell her I need her on the phone in 10 minutes. Priya nodded and left. Evelyn opened her desk drawer and removed the external drive she had prepared 6 days ago, the duplicate set of the administrative documentation, the complete 11-year record, formatted and annotated and ready. She had made it the night after the party, while Lucian was sleeping peacefully down the hall, because she was the kind of person who prepared for the possibility that preparation would become necessary. She called Hart directly. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Arden. You came to my office informally 2 days ago, she said. I think we need to have a more formal conversation. Today. A pause. I can be available at 6. Make it 5, she said. I have a feeling the schedule is moving faster than either of us anticipated. He said he would be there at 5. She hung up and looked at the drive in her hand. 11 years. Every transaction, every entity, every investor communication, every administrative decision, every structural document, and threaded through all of it. Once you knew how to look, the faint but unmistakable fingerprint of money that had entered clean structures from somewhere that was not clean, routed through entities she had administered in good faith, layered and legitimized by the careful architecture she had built, because she was good at building things, and because she had believed, for too long, that what she was building was worth building. She had not been responsible for the channels. She had not known at first, but she had known at some point, and she had stayed. That was the part she had not yet fully looked at directly. She looked at it now in the quiet of her office with the sound of the city outside, and the November light going flat against the windows, and somewhere downstairs, two men who did not give names asking about documents she controlled. She had stayed because she was afraid of what leaving would cost. She had stayed because she had built something real, and she did not want to lose it. She had stayed because she was still, on some level she was not proud of, the person who carried the box carefully across every version of her life, and believed that preservation was the same thing as survival. She set the drive on the desk. The box had been empty. She had put it back on the shelf anyway because it was still hers. Empty was still empty. And staying had not protected anything in the end. Not the photographs, not the structure, not the version of herself she had been trying to preserve by remaining in a situation she had understood for 3 years was fundamentally compromised. She had known. She had stayed anyway. That was her part in this, not the channels, not the criminal architecture, quieter and more personal failure of a woman who had documented a crack in the wall for 3 years and kept the documentation to herself because naming it would have required her to leave, and she had not yet been ready to leave. She had been ready finally, the night he threw the photographs into the fire. Not because of the photographs. The photographs were the proof, not the wound. The wound was older than that. She picked up the drive and held it for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and waited for Dana to call back. And outside her window, the city moved through its Tuesday afternoon with complete indifference to the particular gravity of this particular moment. And Evelyn sat in the center of it and understood, with a clarity she had been avoiding for 3 years, path forward from here was going to require her to stop protecting the version of herself that had stayed and start building the version that was going to have to answer for it. She had the documentation, she had the records. She had 11 years of meticulous, annotated, time-stamped evidence of every decision she had made and every structure she had maintained. And somewhere inside that evidence was the precise record of the moment she had understood what she was looking at and chosen not to act. Hart was going to find that moment. And when he did, the question of her own position in this not criminal, she believed, but not clean either, was going to become the most important question she had faced in her adult life. She was going to have to answer it. There was no longer any version of this in which she did not. Hart arrived at 4:53. He came alone, same as the first time, which Evelyn had started to understand was a deliberate choice rather than a logistical one. A man who brought witnesses to informal meetings was a man who was building a record. And Hart seemed to prefer, at this stage, to operate in the space before records began. He came through the door that Priya held open, and he looked at the room the way he had looked at the party taking inventory without appearing to, the practiced scan of a man who reads environments as a professional habit. Building security had moved the two men from the lobby 20 minutes earlier. They had not identified themselves. They had not made threats. They had simply stood in the lobby and asked for Evelyn by name and waited, with the particular patience of people who are accustomed to waiting, because they know the waiting itself is a form of pressure. Security had asked them to leave, and they had left without incident, which was in some ways more unnerving than resistance would have been. Hart sat. Evelyn set the drive on the desk between them. He looked at it. "Yours, mine," she said. 11 years of administrative documentation for every entity in the Varelli legitimate operation. Every transaction, every investor communication, every structural decision." She paused. "And the record of a pattern in the Crestwood capitalization that I identified 3 years ago and did not report." Hart was very still. "I'm telling you that directly," she said, "because you were going to find it, and I prefer you hear it from me first." He looked at the drive. He looked at her. The expression on his face was the one she was beginning to recognize, not surprise exactly, more like the careful adjustment of a man updating a model he had been confident in. "You documented the pattern," he said, "extensively, and you continued to administrate the entities." "Yes." For 3 years, yes. The office was quiet. Outside the city was doing what cities do at 5. In the November afternoon darkening, thickening with traffic, moving through the transition from day to evening, with total indifference to the specific weight of this specific room. Ms. Arden, Hart said, I want to be precise about something. The pattern you identified the capitalization irregularity in Crestwood. Do you have documentation of when you first identified it? I have the access logs and annotation timestamps. The first notation is dated 37 months ago, and the pattern was ongoing during that period. It continued through approximately 14 months ago, at which point the structure shifted. Crestwood entity was reorganized and the specific channel closed. She held his gaze. I believe the reorganization was in response to something that made the principals nervous. Hart was quiet for a moment. We do, he said. She waited. A separate investigation in another jurisdiction flagged a related entity 14 months ago, he said. The flag was minor, and the investigation didn't develop, but the principals appear to have treated it as a warning and restructured accordingly. He looked at the drive. What you're describing as a shift matches our timeline precisely. She absorbed this. The documentation on that drive, he said. Does it include records from before the restructuring? Everything from the beginning of my administration. Yes. Hart leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his hands loosely clasped, the posture of a man who has just arrived at the moment he has been building toward. Ms. Arden, I need to ask you directly, are you prepared to provide this documentation to my office as part of a formal cooperation process? I'm prepared to discuss the terms of that, she said, with my attorney present, of course. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. She kept her voice level. My administration of those entities was conducted in good faith. The capitalization channels were not visible to me at the point of entry. They were structured specifically to be invisible at the administrative level. When I identified the pattern, I should have acted. I didn't. That's my exposure, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. She paused. But I was not a participant. I was an administrator who stayed too long in a situation I had identified as compromised. Hart studied her. That distinction matters, he said carefully. I want to be honest with you, it doesn't eliminate your exposure. It matters significantly in terms of how my office will approach your position. I know. Dana Kreis is your attorney. Yes. Have her call my office by 8 tonight. We'll set the formal meeting for tomorrow morning. He stood. He picked up the drive and then set it back down, leaving it with her, which she understood as a deliberate signal. Keep that secure, he said. Don't connect it to any network. Don't make additional copies. He looked at her, and Miss Arden, if anyone contacts you tonight regarding the Crestwood documents or anything related to the Varelli structures, call me directly. He placed his card on the desk, a different one than the party card, with a handwritten number on the back, not my office line. That number. She picked up the card. He left. She sat alone for 90 seconds, her hand flat on the desk, the drive in front of her, the city going dark outside the window. Then she called Dana. She was still on the phone with Dana when her other line lit up with Lucian's number. She let it go. He called again 3 minutes later. She finished the call with Dana, who confirmed she would reach Hart's office within the hour, and then called Lucian back. He answered before the first ring completed, which meant he had been sitting with the phone in his hand. Nolan came back, he said. His voice was different. The flatness was still there, but underneath it, something had cracked, not broken, cracked the hairline fracture in a surface that is still holding, but only just. Hour ago to the estate. 4 men this time. She was very still. Are you all right? I'm fine. A short, pressurized pause. I didn't open the door. I watched them on the security feed. They stood outside the gate for 12 minutes and then left. Lucian, I need you to know something, he said. I'm moving forward with Carr's recommendation. I'm calling Hart tonight. Hart was just here. A silence. Here, he said, my office. I told him about the Crestwood pattern. My documentation. She paused. I'm cooperating. The silence on the other end was the kind that contains a great deal of rapid processing. All right, he said finally. Are you somewhere safe? Tonight. Another pause. Evelyn. The men Nolan brought tonight, they're not organization men. I recognized one of them. He's connected to the principal level. The people above Nolan. She understood what this meant. The situation had moved from managed pressure to something with less patience behind it. Get out of the estate, she said. Tonight. Don't stay there. A very long pause. Yeah, he said. It came out rough. Stripped of the management he usually kept around his voice. Just a man on the other end of a line, out of walls to put his back against. Yeah. All right, he hung up. She put the drive in her bag. She turned off the desk lamp. She sat in the dark for a moment and breathed. Then she stood up, put on her coat, and walked out. Lucian moved fast. He packed a single bag 20 minutes, focused, no sentiment, and he left the estate through the service entrance, not the main gate, and he drove to a hotel downtown that he had used before for meetings that required discretion, and where he could pay in a manner that would take time to trace. He checked in under a name that was not his own, which was a capability he had maintained for years and which he had never expected to need against his own organization. He called Carr from the room. She was already working. "I've been in contact with Hart's office," she said. "They're expecting your call. Tonight, not tomorrow. I'm ready, Lucian." Her voice had the quality it got when she was about to say something a client wasn't going to want to hear. The cooperation agreement, what they're going to ask for, is significant. Names, documented. Financial records, recorded evidence if you have it. I have it. A pause, okay. She didn't ask what it contained. Not yet. They're also going to ask you to testify. Potentially. Depending on how the indictments develop. I understand. The men you'll be providing evidence against you know what that means for your security picture. I've been thinking about that since last night. All right? He could hear her gathering herself, the small shift in breath that came before a lawyer moved from assessment to action. I'll be on the call. Don't speak directly to Hart without me present. I know. Call me back in 5 minutes. I'll have the Hart contact patched in. He hung up. He stood at the window of the hotel room 10th floor, looking out over the city, the November dark pressing flat against the glass. Below him the streets were wet with the evening's light rain. The reflections of headlights and street lamps stretched across the pavement in long orange shapes. He had stood in this city his entire adult life, and he had believed, for most of it, that he understood its architecture, not just the physical geography but the social one, the network of obligation and fear and mutual benefit that structured everything underneath the visible surface. He had understood it. He had also believed that his understanding was protection. He had been wrong about that. Understanding a system is not the same as being protected by it. He had known the system and operated within it, and believed that his knowledge made him indispensable. And what he had not fully accounted for was the possibility that indispensability had a ceiling, that there was a level above which you became not indispensable but inconvenient, and that the drive in his jacket pocket had crossed him from one category into the other, the moment the people above Nolan understood he had it. Called Carr back. The call with Hart lasted 41 minutes. Hart's voice on the phone was the same quality as in-person patient, precise, with the forward momentum of a man working toward a specific destination who has learned that the route is negotiable, but the destination is not. He asked clear questions. He did not threaten. He outlined, through Carr, the broad shape of what cooperation would involve and what it would provide in return, and Lucian sat on the edge of the hotel bed and answered in the flat, direct register of a man who has decided to stop managing the presentation and simply give the information. At the end of the call, Hart said, "The drive needs to be in my hands tomorrow morning. Physical handoff through counsel." "Done," Lucian said. And Mr. Varelli, a pause. "The men who came to your property tonight were aware. Don't go back there." Lucian looked at the wall of the hotel room. "I wasn't planning to," he said. The call ended. Carr said, "Try to sleep. Tomorrow is going to be long." He didn't sleep. He sat in the chair by the window and watched the city rain itself dark and then darker. And he thought about 22 years of choices and where they accumulated. Not with remorse, exactly remorse implied that a different version of the choices was available. And he was not sure that was true. He had been the person he was in the circumstances he was in, and he had made the decisions that person made in those circumstances. And the results were what they were. That was not an excuse. It was just the accurate description. He thought about Evelyn at the coffee shop table, the drive sitting between them on the wood surface, her voice saying go to Hart with the tone of someone delivering a correct answer to a problem they've already worked through. She had always been 3 steps ahead of every situation she entered. He had mistaken this for 11 years. For a form of deference, she moved so quietly through problems that he had assumed she was moving through them in service of his interests rather than in command of her own understanding. That assumption had cost him more than he could presently calculate. At 7 the following morning, Carr arrived at the hotel with a clean folder and 2 cups of coffee, and the particular composed energy of a woman who had been awake most of the night working, and had decided to treat this as normal because the alternative was to treat it as extraordinary, which helped no one. They went through the cooperation framework for 90 minutes. At 9:15, Lucian called Gideon. The conversation with Gideon was brief and functional. Gideon was a man who processed bad news efficiently, not easily, but efficiently, which was a different thing. He absorbed the shape of what was coming, asked 3 precise questions, and confirmed that he would handle the legitimate asset division proceedings in parallel and would need Lucian's clear directive regarding the entities. The entities Evelyn has operational authority over, Lucian said. Don't contest them. A pause. Lucian. Several of those represent significance. Don't contest them. His voice was even. She built them. She runs them. They function because of her. Don't contest it. Another pause. Queter. All right, the rest, the portion that's unambiguously mine, I want it clean and separated. Whatever Carr and Dana can work out. Understood. He hung up. At 10:40, Carr drove him to a federal building downtown, and they went through security and into a conference room on the 14th floor where Hart was waiting with 2 members of his team and a recording setup and the formal beginning of the process that would, over the following days and weeks, dismantle the structure Lucian had spent 20 years inside. He set the drive on the table. Hart looked at it. Then he looked at Lucian. Lucian said 6 names. Financial records spanning 8 years. Recorded conversations, 14 of them, including 3 in which the Crestwood capitalization structure is discussed directly. Hart's team member reached for the drive. Lucian said, I need one thing clearly understood before we begin. Hart waited. Evelyn Arden's administration of those entities was clean. She identified an irregularity, and she should have reported it earlier than she did. But she was not a participant. She was not informed of the source structure, and she did not benefit from the channels. Whatever my exposure is in this process, hers is separate and significantly lesser. He looked at Hart directly. I want that on the record from the beginning. Hart was quiet for a moment. That will be evaluated on its own merits, he said. No, I'm telling you what the evidence will show when you look at it. Hart nodded once. The recording began. Across the city at 11 that morning, Nolan Rusk received a call from a number he recognized as belonging to one of the 6 men on the drive. The call lasted 45 seconds. Nolan sat in his car outside a parking garage on the west side and listened to what the man said, and then sat in silence for a long time after the call ended. Then he called a number he had not called in 3 years, a federal field contact who had reached out to him once, informally, and whom he had declined to engage with at the time. This time he let it ring. At 12:15, Evelyn arrived at Hart's building for her own formal meeting with Dana Kreis at her side. She had slept 4 hours. She had eaten breakfast, actual breakfast, eggs, because she had decided that today of all days required the ordinary anchoring of a real meal. She was wearing the dark coat again, and her hair was down, and she moved through the lobby security check with the steadiness of a woman who has made her decision and is not reconsidering it on the way through the door. Hart met them in a second conference room, separate from the one where Lucian had been for the past 2 hours. Professional courtesy, or strategy, or both, she didn't need to know which. Placed her drive on the table. Hers was labeled, which his was not, small tabs. Color-coded, organized with the particular precision that 11 years of meticulous administration produces. Dana set a prepared statement on the table beside it. Hart looked at both. Before we begin formally, Evelyn said, I want to say something for the record. She waited for the recorder to be confirmed on. I administered the Varelli legitimate financial structures for 11 years in the genuine belief that I was managing a lawful operation. I identified an irregularity in the Crestwood capitalization structure 37 months ago. I documented it. I did not report it. I continued to administer the entities for another 23 months before personal circumstances prompted me to begin the process that has led to this meeting. She paused. I am not here because I am cornered. I am here because the correct thing to do and the necessary thing to do have aligned, and I have chosen to act on that alignment. Dana put her hand briefly on Evelyn's arm. A small gesture. Hart said, The record reflects your statement, they began. Outside the building, the November rain had resumed heavier than the night before, the kind of rain that turned the city's usual gray into something darker and cleaner, washing the surfaces of things without changing what was beneath them. In a hotel room on the west side, 2 men who had stood outside the Varelli estate the previous evening received a phone call. The conversation was short. One of the men opened a laptop. Pulled up a city map and a property address. It's not the estate. A different address, a smaller building on the south side. Evelyn's office building. The other man pulled on his jacket. 1240 Priya called Evelyn's cell the first interruption since the formal session had begun. Dana took the call in the hallway and came back with the particular composed expression of someone delivering information that is both alarming and confirming of something already suspected. She leaned close to Evelyn's ear. "There are men at your building again," she said quietly. This time they went upstairs. Priya locked the office. "Building security is there." She said one of them tried the office door. Evelyn looked at Hart. He had heard enough of it. His face had shifted into the operational register she had not seen from him before, faster and harder than the patient attending manner he maintained in interviews. He turned to one of his team members and said 2 sentences in a voice too low to catch fully. But the team member was already out the door. Hart looked back at Evelyn. "Does anyone outside your immediate circle know you're in this building right now?" he said. "I didn't announce it. Your car? Parked in the Federal Structure garage. Valet ticket." He nodded. "We're going to continue," he said. "But I want you to understand what's happening at your office right now is not random. The people behind this moved faster than we anticipated." He looked at her steadily. "Tells me the information on your drive is more significant than even I had assumed." She looked at the labeled drive on the table. 11 years. She had built all of it and documented all of it and stayed longer than she should have and finally left and was sitting here in a federal building in the middle of a Tuesday in November, and somewhere across the city men, who didn't give their names, were trying the handle of her office door. "Then let's not waste time," she said. They continued. 40 minutes into Evelyn's session, Hart's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and then stood and excused himself a break of 3 minutes, which was enough time for something to have occurred and been communicated and required a response. Came back in. "Mr. Varelli's cooperation session is wrapping up in the next room," he said. "He's requested through counsel to speak with you briefly before you both leave the building. He says it's relevant to the cooperation process." Hart paused. "I want to be clear that you are not obligated to have that conversation." Dana looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Hart. "What does he want to say?" she said. He didn't specify, she considered. 5 minutes, she said, in a neutral space. "You present?" Hart nodded. They moved to a smaller room, a plain space, 2 chairs, a table, a window overlooking the wet street below. Lucian came in with Carr. He looked like a man who had been inside a machine for 3 hours and had emerged altered in some specific way, not broken, but recalibrated. Careful management of his surface was still there, but thinner. Something was closer to the skin. He sat, she sat. Hart stood by the door. Carr and Dana took positions near the wall. Lucian said, "Nolan called me 20 minutes ago." She waited. "He's cooperating," he said, separately, on his own. He called Hart's field contact, and they've been speaking for the past hour. He looked at her. "He's not doing it because he got cornered. He said to tell you that he watched what happened at the party, and he should have said something at the time." She absorbed this. "He knew about the photographs," she said. "He knew." Lucian's jaw moved. He said his words that he'd been watching the organization weaken for 2 years, and that the night of the party was the first time he understood that the person holding it together had decided to let go. He looked at his hands for a moment. He said he made his call based on that. Evelyn was quiet. He also told his contact, Lucian continued, that the 2 men who went to your office this morning, their principal knows you're in this building. Someone in the lobby or near it saw you come in. Hart said, "We're aware." Lucian looked at Hart. "Then you know the next move." "We're managing it," Hart said. "Managing it." Lucian's voice had an edge to it now, not anger exactly. The edge of someone who has spent a career understanding what managing a threat actually involves versus what it means when an attorney says it. "They're going to move on the estate. Tonight probably, maybe sooner. There's a safe in the study. I told your team about it this morning. If they get there before your people." "Our people are already there," Hart said. Lucian stopped. "We moved on the estate this morning," Hart said. "After your session began. The safe is in our custody." Lucian stared at him. Then something happened in his face that Evelyn had never seen before in 11 years, not the cold calculation, not the managed anger, not the careful maintenance of the surface. Something underneath all of that gave way, briefly, the way a structure settles when the thing it was braced is suddenly removed. He exhaled. It was a very ordinary sound, just a man exhaling. But it contained, she thought, about 20 years of held breath. She looked at him. He looked at her. "It's done," Carr said quietly to him. He nodded once. The room held that for a moment. Then Evelyn said, "I need to know something." She was looking at Lucian. "The men at my office this morning. Is Priya safe?" Lucian looked at Hart. Hart said building security managed the situation. "Your assistant is fine. She's been asked to work remotely for the next few days as a precaution." Evelyn exhaled through her nose, not relief exactly, but the release of a very specific and immediate tension. "All right," she said. Dana touched her arm again. "Evelyn, we should finish." She stood, Lucian stood. They were standing on opposite sides of the table in a small room, in a federal building in November, with 2 attorneys and a federal prosecutor watching, and the accumulated weight of 11 years and a drive and a set of burned photographs and 2 months of careful construction pressing against the air between them. He said, "Thank you." She looked at him for a moment. "For what?" she said. For being the person who kept the records." His voice was rough at the edges, the roughness of someone who is saying something true that they've never said before and can feel the unfamiliarity of it in their throat. "For knowing what everything was worth." She looked at him for 3 seconds. "I always knew what everything was worth," she said quietly. She walked out. Down the hall, back into the session room, her drive on the table, and Dana settling beside her, and Hart taking his seat again with the recorder light, steady, and red. Put her hands flat on the table. She breathed. And across the city, in a parking garage on the west side, a man who had spent 2 decades inside a system he built and believed in sat in the driver's seat of a car he was about to stop thinking of as his, and he looked at the rain on the windshield for a long moment before he finally started the engine and drove away from everything he had known toward the uncertain and narrow and necessary road that was the only one left. The indictments came on a Thursday. Evelyn heard about it the way she heard about most things now through Dana, who called at 7:40 in the morning, while Evelyn was drinking coffee at her kitchen table in the apartment she had rented 3 weeks after leaving the estate. The apartment was on the 9th floor of a building in the middle part of the city, smaller than anything she had lived in since her 20s, with windows that faced east and let in the morning light in a way she had not experienced in 11 years of the estate's north-facing master bedroom. She had not expected to like the apartment as much as she did. 6 indictments, Dana said, unsealed this morning. Hart's office released a statement. Evelyn set down her coffee cup. "Who?" Dana read the names. 4 of them Evelyn recognized from the financial structures. 2 were men whose names appeared in the Crestwood capitalization correspondence she had documented, whose signatures she had seen on documents that had passed through her administrative system without explanation. 1 was a name she had heard exactly once, at a dinner 3 years ago, a man who had sat at the far end of the table and said almost nothing, and whom Lucian had introduced without giving an affiliation. The 6th name was Nolan Rusk. She was quiet for a moment. "Nolan's indictment is structured differently," Dana said. "His cooperation agreement is already in place. The indictment is essentially procedural. It establishes his formal status in the case. His actual exposure is significantly mitigated by what he provided. I know Lucian is not named. I know that too." A pause. "Are you all right?" She considered the question seriously, which was a habit she had been developing, the practice of actually answering the question, rather than producing the socially appropriate response on autopilot. "I'm functional," she said. "I'll be all right." The statement from Hart's office references cooperation from multiple sources within the financial structure. It doesn't name you specifically. Good. "Your own exposure review is complete," Dana said. "Hart's office finalized their assessment yesterday. I was going to call you this morning regardless. The determination is what we hoped: material witness, with cooperation credit. No charges recommended. The documented timeline of your identification of the irregularity worked in your favor." Evelyn looked at the east-facing window. The morning light was coming in flat and pale, the particular quality of November giving way to December, the year running out. "Dana," she said, "yes, thank you. For all of it." A brief pause, the kind that comes from a woman who has spent 30 years in adversarial proceedings and is not accustomed to gratitude landing simply. "You did the hard parts," Dana said. After the call, Evelyn sat with her coffee until it was cold. Then she got up, rinsed the cup, and went to get dressed for work. The offices of Arden Development Group occupied the 11th and 12th floors of a building on the east side of downtown, 4 blocks from the small 7th-floor administrative space where she had spent 11 years running other people's structures and which she had vacated 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The new space was not large by the standards of significant development operations, but it was clean and well lit and organized according to a system that she had designed herself and every person who worked in it had been hired by her on the basis of demonstrated competence and specific recommendation. Priya had come with her. This had not surprised Evelyn. Priya was the kind of person who assessed situations accurately and moved accordingly. But it had meant something that she had not put into words and did not intend to. Some things were worth more kept quiet. Marcus Holt had come with her in the sense that the Meridian portfolio remained under her management, following the asset division, a determination that Gideon had not contested because Lucian had specifically directed him not to, and because the operational documentation made the case for continuity so thoroughly that contesting it would have been both legally dubious and practically futile. 3 other investment relationships had followed through the transition, their principals having made the assessment that stability lived on her side of the divide. She arrived at the office at 8:23. Priya had coffee ready, which was habit and kindness in equal measure, and a message stack that included 2 investor calls to return, a contractor follow-up on the Meridian renovation project, and a handwritten note from the building management of their current space regarding a lease renewal that Evelyn had been expecting. She took the coffee. She reviewed the message stack. She sat at her desk in the east-facing office and she began her day. At 10:15, she stepped out to the small terrace off the conference room, an outdoor space barely large enough for 2 chairs, and a narrow planter that someone had filled with winter-hardy herbs she didn't know the names of and she, called the number Carr, had given her 2 weeks earlier. Carr answered on the second ring. "The indictments came down," Evelyn said. "I saw. Lucian is aware." "How is he?" Pause communicated something without naming it. "Managing," Carr said. "It's an adjustment. He's been out of the city for 3 weeks now." Evelyn had known this. She had not asked where, and Carr had not volunteered it, and that had seemed like the right architecture for the information. "The cooperation agreement is holding," Carr said. His testimony in the preliminary proceedings was it was sufficient. The prosecution is satisfied with what he provided, and his physical situation. "We have arrangements in place. The principals who were most immediately threatening have larger problems now, which tends to redirect attention." Carr paused. "He asked me to tell you something." Evelyn waited. "He said the asset division is final and he won't be contesting any element of it. He also said, and I'm quoting him directly, that the Arden name on the company is correct, that it should be your name, that it was always built on your work." The terrace was cold. She could feel the December air through her coat, the particular sharp edge of a morning that had not yet decided to become afternoon. "Tell him I heard that," she said. "I will." She went back inside. The day moved the way days move when there is real work in them, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular texture of time that is occupied rather than endured. She returned the investor calls. She reviewed the contractor proposal on Meridian. She signed the lease renewal, which committed Arden Development Group to this space for 3 years, which was the first time, since the night of the party, that she had committed anything to 3 years. Felt different than she expected. Not lighter exactly. More like solid ground after a long time on surfaces that moved. At 4 in the afternoon, she got the call she had been expecting for 2 weeks and had not known she was dreading until the moment she saw the name on her phone. Sabrina Voss. She looked at the name for 2 rings. "I'm not going to take a lot of your time," Sabrina said. Her voice was different from what Evelyn remembered from the party. The careful performance of it was gone, stripped down to something that was smaller and more genuine and considerably more tired. "I wanted to. I thought you deserved to hear from me directly." Evelyn was quiet. "I didn't know about the photographs," Sabrina said, "before he did it. I want you to know that. I was standing across the room, and I didn't know that was going to happen, and when it did, I didn't." A pause. Something in the pause that had the texture of something being swallowed back. "I should have said something. In the moment. I didn't. And I've been carrying that." Evelyn looked at the surface of her desk. "I'm not going to tell you it was okay," she said. "I know. And I'm not going to tell you that I understand your position, because I don't, not entirely." She paused. "But I believe you that you didn't know. Lucian never told people what he was going to do." That was she stopped. That was one of his methods. A silence on the other end of the line. "My career is gone," Sabrina said. Not with self-pity, with the flat accuracy of someone stating a fact they have stopped trying to argue with. "I know, I just stopped. A restart. I wanted to say that I'm sorry. For all of it. For being part of a situation that..." "Sabrina," Evelyn's voice was not unkind. "I accept that. I do. But I need you to understand that the situation wasn't created by you, and me forgiving you for your part in it doesn't. It doesn't change what I'm building now. Do you understand?" A long pause. Yeah, Sabrina said. Yeah, I do. Take care of yourself, Evelyn said. She hung up. She sat with that for a moment. The weight of the call, the strangeness of it, the way unexpected grace can arrive in uncomfortable shapes. Then she opened her laptop and finished the afternoon's work. She left the office at 6:15, which was earlier than she had been leaving, and she walked rather than drove. The building was close enough to her apartment that the walk was 20 minutes in good weather and 30 in bad, and she had started doing it in the evenings as a way of giving herself a seam in the day, a transition between the work and the quiet. She stopped at a grocery store on the way. She bought actual food ingredients, not prepared things. She had been cooking again, which was something she had stopped doing somewhere in the middle of the marriage, when the domestic routines of the estate had been managed by staff and her own relationship with the kitchen had narrowed to coffee and the occasional lunch she made herself when she was working through the weekend. Cooked dinner. She ate it at the kitchen table with the television off and the east-facing windows showing the city's evening lights. And she thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, the way the mind moves when it has been under sustained pressure, and the pressure has finally, structurally, begun to lift. After dinner, she went to the spare room, the room she used as an office, and she opened the box. She had retrieved it from the estate 3 days after Lucian left, for wherever Lucian had gone. She had driven there in the morning, let herself in with the key she had not yet returned, and gone upstairs to the study, where the shelf was empty, and she had taken the box down from where she had placed it and carried it to her car. It had ridden in the back seat for a week before she moved it into the spare room. She had not opened it in that time. She opened it now, empty as she knew it was, the worn wood, the brass latch with its 30-year stiffness, the small carved initials on the bottom corner that had been there longer than she had been alive. She set it on the desk. She opened the desk drawer and took out the photograph. She had found it 6 weeks ago, through a process that had taken 3 weeks of quiet searching in email, to a second cousin she had not spoken to in years, who had connected her to an aunt on her father's side, who had a shoebox of old family photographs stored in a closet in another state. They had scanned them and sent them through, and among the scans was a duplicate of the photograph she had cared about, most not identical, a different angle from the same occasion, the same summer, the same squinting against the light, but taken from slightly further back so that you could see the edge of the yard and the corner of the house, and everyone was laughing at the same off-screen thing. She had printed it and had it restored by a service that worked with damaged and faded prints. The restorer had done good work, not perfect. The saturation was slightly off, and there was a soft edge in the lower left corner that the original had not had, but the faces were clear. Her mother squinting, her father's hand on her shoulder, her sister at an age she barely remembered. The yard and the house in the summer. She set it against the back wall of the box. It sat there, slightly imperfect, inside the worn wood, against the brass latch. She looked at it for a long time. It was not the original. It would never be the original. The original had become ash in a fireplace on a November night, in a house she did not live in anymore, in front of 60 people who had watched and said nothing. That was a real loss. She was not going to tell herself it wasn't. The impulse to say it didn't matter, that what mattered was the family itself, and not the paper record of them. She had tried that reasoning, and it was not wrong exactly, but it was incomplete. The photographs had mattered. The loss of them had been real. Grief didn't become smaller by insisting on its proportionality. She had learned this in the weeks since the party, that the things worth grieving were worth grieving properly, that the discipline of stillness she had maintained in that room, the decision not to cry in front of 60 people, had been right, but that the stillness was only right in the moment and not as a permanent policy. That there was a difference between not giving someone the satisfaction of watching you break and actually believing you had no right to break. She had cried twice since the party. Once in the apartment on a Tuesday afternoon when she came home from a long meeting and sat down on the couch, and the day's wait simply arrived all at once. And once at a restaurant, inexplicably, when the waiter brought bread to the table and it smelled like the kitchen in her parents' house. Both times she had let it run its course. Both times she had been fine afterward, not healed, not resolved, but functional and clear, the way you are, after something necessary rather than something damaging. She closed the box gently. She left the photograph inside it. She went to bed at 9:43, which was earlier than she had gone to bed in years, and she slept without waking until 6:15, which was 7.5 hours, which was the longest uninterrupted sleep she had gotten Since the morning she had driven downtown to Dana Kreis's office and said the word divorce and set everything in motion. She woke to the east-facing window full of gray morning light and lay still for a moment, listening to the apartment. Quiet, the ordinary quiet of a space that belonged to her. She got up. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen counter and drank it, while the light outside shifted from gray to pale gold, the December morning arriving slowly and cold and without apology, the way December always did. She thought about her mother's kitchen, the hand lotion smell, particular sound of the radio in the mornings, always tuned to the same station, a habit so old it had become part of the air. She thought about her father in his work uniform. She thought about the summer photograph inside the box in the spare room, slightly imperfect against the brass latch. Some things could be recovered, not restored recovered, which was different. You did not get back what burned. You found what survived in the margins, the edge of the yard, the second cousin's shoebox, the slightly different angle that caught the same moment from further back. You worked with what remained. You did not pretend it was the same as what was lost. She finished her coffee. She rinsed the cup. She got dressed for work. Across the state, in a town she had never been to and did not intend to visit, Lucian Varelli woke in a house that was smaller than any room. In the estate he had spent 20 years in. The house sat at the edge of a lake that was the color of iron in December, surrounded by bare trees and the particular stillness of a landscape that had not been curated for impression. There was a dock. There was a rowboat he had not taken out. There was a propane heater that was adequate without being comfortable. He had rented the house for 3 months from a man who didn't ask questions, which was the kind of arrangement he had spent 20 years knowing how to make, and which now existed entirely outside the context that had made it possible. He made coffee in a kitchen with 4 cabinet doors and 2 burners, one of which ran slightly too hot. He had learned to account for this to turn whatever he was cooking off about 30 seconds early to give the residual heat time to finish the work. It was the kind of small adjustment to a small reality that he had not made in a very long time. He took his coffee to the dock. He sat in the chair he had put there on the second day, a folding chair from the hardware store in town, the kind that cost less than any single item of furniture in the estate had cost, and he looked at the lake and drank his coffee and was, for the 3rd or 4th morning in a row, simply still. Not strategizing, not calculating, not running contingencies or managing information or reading the angle of a situation. Sitting. He was not sure he had ever done that before in his adult life. Sat somewhere without purpose, not waiting, not planning, not preparing for what came next, just existing in a location while it was morning. He was not good at it. He was getting less bad at it. He had a notebook. He had bought it at the same hardware store from a rack near the register, a plain composition notebook with a black cover. He had not written in it for the first week because he had no practice with the activity, and it felt strange in a way he could not justify aloud. Then one evening, he had picked it up because there was nothing else to do, and he had started writing, not knowing what he was writing toward. He wrote about the photographs, wrote about the evening of the party, not the whole evening, not the guests or the food or the performance of the event, but the specific moment. His hands on the box, the weight of it, which he had not registered at the time, the way Evelyn's face had looked before she turned away. He had told himself in the moment that the stillness in her face was defeat. He had read her composure as surrender. He understood now that he had been wrong about that for 11 years. About most things, but especially about that. Her stillness had never been defeat. It had been a woman making space around his noise, his need, his particular form of consuming everything in his radius, and in that space, quietly and without announcement, building something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with herself. He had not understood this. He had not had the capacity to understand it, perhaps, because understanding it would have required him to acknowledge that the most powerful presence in his world was not him. He wrote these things down in the composition notebook on the nights when the lake was dark and the propane heater ran and there was nothing else asking for his attention. He wrote them not to send to her. He was clear about this with himself, that writing was not a prelude to contact, that the words were not for her, but for the part of himself that had never been asked to account for anything and not to resolve them, because he had begun to understand that some things are not resolved so much as they are lived with until they become part of the landscape. He wrote them because they were true, and he had spent 20 years surrounded by people for whom truth was a negotiating position, and he was done with that. On the 14th day at the lake, Carr called. She told him that Nolan had completed his formal cooperation testimony. She told him that 2 of the 6 indicted men had entered plea negotiations, which would likely accelerate the timeline for the broader proceedings. She told him that his own cooperation credit was being formally processed and that the legal framework protecting his position was, as she put it, holding. "Are you all right out there?" she said. "Ask me again in a month," he said. Quiet for a moment. "Lucian. The men from the estate, the ones who came twice. Their principal is among the 2 entering plea negotiations. He has larger concerns than you right now. I know. I want to make sure you actually know that, and aren't sitting out there waiting for something to come through the door." He looked at the lake. "I'm sitting on a dock," he said, "drinking bad coffee. I'm not waiting for anything." Pause. That's new. A lot of things are new. After the call, he sat on the dock for another hour. A bird he didn't know the name of landed briefly on the edge of the rowboat and considered him without alarm, and then flew away. He thought about Evelyn at the coffee shop table. The drive between them on the wood surface. Her voice saying "go to heart" with the simplicity of someone stating the only remaining correct answer to a problem they had already fully solved. She'd always been the one who solved things. He had spent 11 years mistaking her solutions for his own because she was solving them inside his structures on his behalf in ways he was too incurious to examine. He had taken credit for the functioning of a world she had built. He had taken her competence as tribute to his importance. He had burned her photographs because her stillness made him angry. He wrote that line down later in the notebook because it was the most honest thing he had been able to articulate about the night of the party, and he needed to look at it plainly, not perform looking at it. Actually look. Her stillness made him angry because it was a form of self-containment he could not penetrate and had never been able to penetrate, and which he had interpreted, therefore, as a refusal, as withheld approval, as a judgment rendered so quietly that he could never quite get purchase on it to argue back. He had not understood that a person was allowed to be still, that stillness was not a verdict, that her interior life was hers, and not a mirror for his self-image, and not a resource he was owed access to. He had burned 40 years of her family because she was still in a room where he needed to feel powerful. He wrote that down too. He looked at what he had written for a long time. Then he closed the notebook and put it on the table and went to make more coffee, because that was all there was to do, and doing it was enough. The hearing that formalized the dissolution of the Varelli financial entities took place on a Wednesday in early December, in a conference room on the 15th floor of a downtown building that smelled like carpet, adhesive, and recycled air. Evelyn was present with Dana. Gideon was there on behalf of Lucian's remaining interests. Hart's office had sent a representative to observe. The proceeding was technical and not dramatic. Documents were reviewed. Determinations were confirmed. Signatures were applied. The Meridian portfolio and the 3 associated commercial entities were formally transferred to Arden Development Group's administration. The remaining Varelli portions were separated cleanly and assigned to a holding structure Gideon had established for the purpose. It took 4 hours. At the end of it, Gideon shook Evelyn's hand across the table. His expression was the slightly pained acknowledgement of a man who has done his job correctly in a situation that could not have been comfortable. "For what it's worth," he said. "The documentation you maintained, the operational records, they were the clearest I've seen in 30 years of this work." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. She meant it. She walked out of the building into the December afternoon, cold now, genuinely cold, the city moving through the last weeks of the year, with its collar up and its head down, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment before getting into her car. Dana stood beside her. "That's it," Dana said. "That's it." They stood there for a moment, the 2 of them, on the sidewalk in the cold. "What do you want to do?" Dana said. "To market." Evelyn considered. "I'm going to go back to the office," she said. "I have a contractor call at 4 and a lease amendment to review." Dana looked at her. "That's really what you want to do?" "Yes," Evelyn said, and meant it. Dana nodded, recognizing something in this. "Then go do it." She drove back to the office. She took the contractor call. She reviewed the lease amendment. She signed where Dana had indicated and scanned it back. She answered 6 emails and returned 1 investor call and ate a late lunch at her desk, a sandwich. Nothing remarkable, and by 6 o'clock the afternoon had become evening, and the work had been done, and she was still herself. This was the thing she had not expected, to still be herself. She had expected that the process, the divorce, the cooperation, the legal proceedings, the dismantling of a world she had spent 11 years inside would leave her altered in some fundamental way, emptied or hardened or reduced. She had prepared for loss and had experienced it. She had prepared for difficulty and it had been difficult. but she was still herself, possibly more herself than she had been in years, in the sense that the self she was now was not organized around managing someone else's world. It was organized around her own. Her desk, her investors, her lease, her contractor call, her company with her name on the door. She turned off the lamp on the corner of the desk. She put on her coat. She walked to the terrace off the conference room, the small outdoor space, with the 2 chairs and the narrow planter, and she stood in the December air for a minute, looking at the city. The lights were on everywhere, the particular density of a city in winter, the way illumination concentrates when darkness comes early. Somewhere below her, a car horn, a brief and ordinary sound. Somewhere further out, the faint movement of traffic on the bridge. She thought about the photograph in the box, slightly imperfect. The wrong saturation, the soft corner, everyone squinting against the same light. She thought about the box itself, the worn wood, the brass latch with its 30-year stiffness, the initials her grandmother had carved into the bottom corner before Evelyn was born. The box had been empty. She had put the photograph back inside it. Not to replace what was burned. She was not going to tell herself that. It wasn't honest. The original was gone. That loss was real and permanent. The box was real too. And the photograph was real. And what she had now was what she had. An imperfect restoration inside a worn container that had survived everything the original had not. She went back inside. She gathered her things. She walked to the elevator, rode it down, came out into the lobby, nodded to the security desk, pushed through the glass door into the December evening. The walk home was 30 minutes in the cold, and she walked it because the seam between the work and the quiet was still worth having, and the quiet was still worth arriving at. At the apartment, she made dinner. She ate it at the kitchen table. She watched the city's lights in the east-facing windows, and she felt, in the particular way that solid ground feels after a long time on surfaces that moved, the ordinary weight of her own life beneath her. It was not peaceful exactly. There was still the legal process and the ongoing cooperation proceedings and the work of building a company from the ground up, and the fact of being 44 and starting over in ways she had not chosen. There was still the photograph with its wrong saturation, sitting inside the box in the spare room. There was still the loss of the original, and the years, and the version of herself that had stayed too long, because leaving felt like losing. She had lost those years. That was real. But she was still here, eating dinner at her own table in her own apartment, in her own city in the early December dark, and tomorrow the office would be open, and the work would be there, and Priya would have coffee ready, and Marcus Holt would call about Q1 projections, and the lease amendment would be filed, and the company would be one day older. She washed her dishes. She dried them and put them away. She went to the spare room and sat at the desk and opened the box and looked at the photograph for a while, her mother squinting, her father's hand, her sister, the yard and the house and the summer light. Then she closed the box and left it on the desk. He went to bed. The December dark pressed quietly against the east-facing windows, the city settling into its late hours, the ordinary movement of a world that had not paused for any of this, and would not, and in the morning the light would come back through those windows, the same as it always did, earlier than you expected, pale and without announcement, the day beginning again, as days do not because the night has been resolved, but simply because it has ended. And that for now was enough. Lucian stopped. "We moved on the estate this morning," Hart said, "after your session began. The safe is in our custody." Lucian stared at him. Then something happened in his face that Evelyn had never seen before in 11 years, not the cold calculation, not the managed anger, not the careful maintenance of the surface. Something underneath all of that gave way, briefly, the way a structure settles when the thing it was braced is suddenly removed. He exhaled. It was a very ordinary sound, just a man exhaling. But it contained, she thought, about 20 years of held breath. She looked at him. He looked at her. "It's done," Carr said quietly to him. He nodded once. The room held that for a moment. Then Evelyn said, "I need to know something." She was looking at Lucian. "The men at my office this morning. Is Priya safe?" Lucian looked at Hart. Hart said building security managed the situation. "Your assistant is fine. She's been asked to work remotely for the next few days as a precaution." Evelyn exhaled through her nose, not relief exactly, but the release of a very specific and immediate tension. "All right," she said. Dana touched her arm again. "Evelyn, we should finish." She stood, Lucian stood. They were standing on opposite sides of the table in a small room, in a federal building in November, with 2 attorneys and a federal prosecutor watching, and the accumulated weight of 11 years and a drive and a set of burned photographs and 2 months of careful construction pressing against the air between them. Thank you. She looked at him for a moment. For what? She said. For being the person who kept the records. His voice was rough at the edges, the roughness of someone who is saying something true that they've never said before and can feel the unfamiliarity of it in their throat. For knowing what everything was worth. She looked at him for 3 seconds. I always knew what everything was worth, she said quietly. She walked out. Down the hall, back into the session room, her drive on the table, and Dana settling beside her, and Hart taking his seat again with the recorder light, steady, and red. Put her hands flat on the table. She breathed. And across the city, in a parking garage on the west side, a man who had spent 2 decades inside a system he built and believed in sat in the driver's seat of a car he was about to stop thinking of as his, and he looked at the rain on the windshield for a long moment before he finally started the engine and drove away from everything he had known toward the uncertain and narrow and necessary road that was the only one left. Hart's voice on the phone was the same quality as in-person patient, precise, with the forward momentum of a man working toward a specific destination who has learned that the route is negotiable, but the destination is not. He asked clear questions. He did not threaten. He outlined, through Carr, the broad shape of what cooperation would involve and what it would provide in return, and Lucian sat on the edge of the hotel bed and answered in the flat, direct register of a man who has decided to stop managing the presentation and simply give the information. At the end of the call, Hart said, "The drive needs to be in my hands tomorrow morning. Physical handoff through counsel." "Done," Lucian said. And Mr. Varelli, a pause. "The men who came to your property tonight were aware. Don't go back there." Lucian looked at the wall of the hotel room. "I wasn't planning to," he said. The call ended. Carr said, "Try to sleep. Tomorrow is going to be long." He didn't sleep. He sat in the chair by the window and watched the city rain itself dark and then darker. And he thought about 22 years of choices and where they accumulated. Not with remorse, exactly remorse implied that a different version of the choices was available, and he was not sure that was true. He had been the person he was in the circumstances he was in, and he had made the decisions that person made in those circumstances. And the results were what they were. That was not an excuse. It was just the accurate description. He thought about Evelyn at the coffee shop table, the drive sitting between them on the wood surface, her voice saying, "Go to Hart," with the tone of someone delivering a correct answer to a problem they've already worked through. She had always been 3 steps ahead of every situation she entered. He had mistaken this for 11 years. For a form of deference, she moved so quietly through problems that he had assumed she was moving through them in service of his interests rather than in command of her own understanding. That assumption had cost him more than he could presently calculate. At 7 the following morning, Carr arrived at the hotel with a clean folder and 2 cups of coffee, and the particular composed energy of a woman who had been awake most of the night working, and had decided to treat this as normal because the alternative was to treat it as extraordinary, which helped no one. They went through the cooperation framework for 90 minutes. At 9:15, Lucian called Gideon. The conversation with Gideon was brief and functional. Gideon was a man who processed bad news efficiently, not easily, but efficiently, which was a different thing. He absorbed the shape of what was coming, asked 3 precise questions, and confirmed that he would handle the legitimate asset division proceedings in parallel and would need Lucian's clear directive regarding the entities. "The entities Evelyn has operational authority over," Lucian said. "Don't contest them." A pause. "Lucian, several of those represent significance.